Good morning. It is Monday, May the 29th, Memorial Day, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have promises, one-party rule, an appeal to Democrats, you decide between the capitalist and communist manifestos, and a you decide on the debt ceiling between MSNBC and Fox News. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to Fox and Friends this morning, and they're analyzing the political race as they're wont to do, and talking about Ron DeSantis. And it occurred to me while they were doing this that what we all need to look forward to is hearing from not just Ron DeSantis, but all the other candidates, their promises regarding their administration. So what does Ron DeSantis promise to do once he's in office? Because the way that Donald Trump may end up separating himself from the rest of the field is that Donald Trump may end up being the only candidate that makes promises. So that's something to look for. Look to see, does DeSantis make promises? Do the other candidates make promises? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little clip from Fox News Live.
A few months ago in terms of positioning. And again, if you want to roll back, as I do, all of the IRS, the $80 billion to hire 87,000 people in a corrupt and unreformed IRS, we need to fix that. You need a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president.
So there you have it. Now, they're talking about the deal to raise the debt ceiling. There was a tentative deal that was made over the weekend. And so that's what he's talking about here. But again, it goes right back to what I've said before. We have two parties in this country, but they're not competing with one another for constituents. What they're doing is they're both competing to have one party rule, because that's what he's just described here. To have the House, the Senate, and the president is one party rule. Back in a minute. Thank you. So for all the Democrats out there, you really need to consider voting Republican and becoming a member of the Republican Party. And I'm talking about blue dog Democrats, right-thinking Democrats. If you're a socialist Democrat, you can stay where you are. But if you're a right-thinking Democrat, you really need to consider becoming a Republican, because let's look at the budget, or not the budget, but the debt ceiling situation here. All the money that's being spent on the debt, all of the money that's being spent on the interest, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars is being spent on that, is money that could be spent on other things. I'm sure you as a Democrat have all kinds of interesting social program ideas. What about pollution mitigation, trying to reduce pollution in the country? All the money that we're sending to other countries for this debt is money that we cannot spend on those programs. And stop and think about it. When we go out and we borrow money, if we borrow, let's say, $10, we may end up spending $15 when you complete the whole note on the loan. We spent the original $10 plus $5 in interest. So we're spending more for this program, or the most of the money that for this program is not even being spent here in the United States. It's being spent overseas. It's being given to the Communist Chinese and others. So if you're a Democrat, you really need to seriously consider that the Democrat Party is out of control. It is not doing what's in anybody's best interests. It is not doing what is in the best interest of the United States of America. Maybe or maybe not, it's even doing what's in the best interests of the Democrat Party. That remains to be seen. Apparently, there's a lot of people leaving the Democrat Party to go where, I'm not sure. I hope and would like them to come to the Republican Party and to vote Republican. We're the party of civil rights. We're the party of pollution mitigation. We're the responsible party. We're the party that actually gets things done. The Democrat Party likes to come up with all kinds of ideas, some of them rather far-fetched, but it's always the Republican Party that's expected to make those ideas into reality. So, and again, last shot on this is the money that they're spending in terms of debt is money that could be spent here at home for various types of social programs, or even if you're into it, on various social programs overseas, anti-poverty programs, helping people find clean sources of water, et cetera, et cetera. So, because there's a lot of charities around that are begging people for money each and every day, at the same time our government is sending interest payments, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in interest payments to our debtors. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So today we have the Capitalist Manifesto versus the Communist Manifesto. You decide. So first up is going to be the Communist Manifesto, and it's a little over 4 minutes.
The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed, or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible. And from the numerous national and local literatures, there arises a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e., to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the towns. It has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Just as it has made the country dependent on the towns, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeois, the East on the West. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated production and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation, with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor?
Okay, that was the Communist Manifesto, and now, about the same length, about a little over 4 minutes, for the Capitalist Manifesto.
The roots of capitalism are ancient, so ancient in fact that they likely predate even language in the development of civilization. Capitalism arose from something so uniquely human and so intuitive that it may well be hardwired into our genetic code. Barter. Imagine the dawn of man, clans of hunter-gatherers following the herds in search of food. A few of our ancestors doubtless possessed greater physical abilities and refined skills in hunting game or locating edible vegetation, and their success won them a greater share of the bounty. Even at this primitive stage, other members of the clan would have specialized in the making of tools or the tanning of hides, activities that support the primary goal of feeding the clan. Those earning a greater share of the bounty would exchange some of their perishable surplus for a straighter spear or warmer clothing, simple barter transactions based on the perceived value of the goods offered. Capitalism evolved as one of the earliest characteristics distinguishing human behavior from that of all other animals. We alone have developed the ability to satisfy our needs and wants through the peaceful exchange of value for value. The elegant beauty of capitalism lies in the fact that regardless of how global or interconnected the world becomes economically, it never loses sight of the importance of the individual. The genius of capitalism is that it is not a monolithic, centrally planned monstrosity, but rather a fluid system with millions of individual exchanges, resulting in the most efficient allocation of resources. The difference between centrally planned economies and free market capitalism is the difference between glaciers and the ocean. The debate over government's role in the economy is a staple of modern politics, with opposing sides arguing for greater or lesser intervention in the marketplace. This debate took on a new form in the fall of 2011 with the Occupy Wall Street protest. Interviews with these anti-capitalism protesters reminded me of a scene in the 1979 Monty Python film Life of Brian that ended with the following exchange between a group of anti-Roman protesters. All right, but apart from better sanitation and medicine and education and irrigation and public health and roads and a fresh water system and baths and public order, what have the Romans done for us? Brought peace? What? Oh, yeah, peace, yes. Shut up. In a similar vein, the Occupy Wall Street crowd's reactionary furor against capitalism apparently blinds them to the myriad benefits of capitalism, including many that have made both their lives and even their protest possible. In their demagoguery, they conveniently ignore the fact that modern market capitalism has reduced poverty and raised life expectancy more in the past century than did all previous economic systems in the previous 5,000 years of recorded human history. The Wall Street protesters lack a fundamental understanding of capitalism and how the market system works. They appear to think that the cell phones they use, food they eat, hotels and tents they stay in, their sleeping bags and clothes, the cars they drive and the fuel that powers them, and all the goods and services they consume every day would exist under a different system, perhaps in more abundance. While the hypocrisy of the Occupy Wall Street crowd may be entertaining, the threat they and their like-minded allies pose to civilization is real and rooted in a lack of understanding of the founding American principles of individual liberty and self-governance. We are threatened by an education system that fails to instruct our children in how limited government and a market economy lead to liberty and wealth for the masses. The reason people in sub-Saharan Africa and rural India live like refugees is not that they don't work as hard as we do or are not as smart as we are, but that they live in an economic system that doesn't allow them to be productive. The basis of our economic prosperity is market capitalism, individual liberty and responsibility, and limited government.
Okay, so that was the Capitalist Manifesto. So you've heard the Communist Manifesto and the Capitalist Manifesto, you decide. Back in a minute. Thank you. So now we're going to have another You Decide, and it's going to be between MSNBC and Fox News on the results of the debt ceiling negotiation. First up, MSNBC.
Right into the news, and we begin this morning in Washington, where a deal has finally been made over the debt ceiling.
We've got good news. Just spoke with Speaker McCarthy, and we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement that we're ready to move to the full Congress. It takes the threat of catastrophic default off the table, protects our hard-earned and historic economic recovery, and the agreement also represents a compromise, which means no one got everything they want. But that's the responsibility of governing.
We know at any time when you sit and negotiate within two parties that you got to work with both sides of the aisle. So it's not 100% what everybody wants, but when you look, the country is going to be stronger. This is going to be transformational, where Congress is literally going to vote to spend less money this year than we spent last year.
The House will likely vote on the bill Wednesday, and then the Senate should take it up shortly after. If passed, the United States should be able to avoid default. The agreement, as is, would raise the debt ceiling until 2025, which means the government should be able to pay its bills until after the next election. Under the agreement, domestic programs will see an inflation-adjusted reduction, but those cuts would be mitigated by redirecting funding from the IRS and other areas that House Republicans wanted to claw back. The deal features new work requirements for some federal aid programs, including food stamps and family welfare benefits. If passed, the bill would rescind billions in unspent COVID relief funds. However, it would keep in place President Biden's student debt relief program as the Supreme Court continues to deliberate over its fate. In light of the agreement, both House Speaker McCarthy and President Biden are claiming the bill gives major wins for their respective parties, with the GOP saying the deal brings down spending, and Democrats are suggesting it protects gains made over the past 2 years. Meanwhile, the deal to raise the debt ceiling is facing some criticism from both sides of the aisle. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the head of the House Progressive Caucus, signaled yesterday that some Democrats simply won't support the agreement.
Democrats watching right now at the White House, your friend Hakeem Jeffries, others, do they still have to worry about the Progressive Caucus and whether or not your caucus will support? Yes, they do. Okay, Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you so much.
Yes, they have to worry.
Yes, they have to worry. Okay.
And on the Republican side, GOP Congressman Chip Roy, a member of the House Freedom Caucus, offered his own colorful criticism of the bill and vowed to try to stop it from passing. Despite the objections from some of these Freedom Caucus members, Speaker McCarthy says the majority of Republicans are on board.
We did a conference call with our conference, and over 95% were overwhelmingly excited about what they see. Members will react to whatever rumor you guys are writing about. Let's let the members actually read the bill before they make a decision to go forward.
Joining us now, co-author of the Washington Post's Early 202 newsletter, Leanne Caldwell, congressional reporter for the New York Times, Luke Broadwater, and chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Leanne, let's start with you. Just walk us through the last 48, 72 hours as to how we got here. How did this agreement finally get nailed down between the president and the House Speaker?
So there was obviously these negotiations that were going on for really intense negotiations for more than a week. It was hit or miss for a long time, but then the White House team of Shalonda Young, the OMB director, Steve Ricchetti, who's a top White House advisor, and Louisa Terrell, were talking with Patrick McHenry, a Republican from North Carolina, and Garrett Graves, a congressman from Louisiana. And with the way that this deal finally came together is that they realized how they could find 218 votes. They had to go through every single issue and try to come up with the best possible scenario and combination of policies that they think could pass the House of Representatives. And that's ultimately the key here. Now, what they did not do is they did not go back and forth between their members during these negotiations and back to the negotiating table. They were negotiating based on what they thought their members would be able to support. And now what they have to do is they have to sell this plan, this deal, this legislation to their members. And that is what has been going on, especially on the Republican side for the past 24 hours.
So, Luke, let's dive into that a little further. The whip operation here from both parties. Where do things stand? The two sides, at least publicly, yesterday suggested that they feel confident that they'll get the votes needed, but we know that there's some holdouts and some real resistance both sides of the aisle. Tell us where we are, and are they going to get the magic number?
Yeah, I mean, you can see how this deal could fall apart, right? If the House Freedom Caucus has already essentially declared war on the deal, so that's 35 no votes right there. If they could convince more and more Republicans to see things their way and join with them, and Kevin McCarthy loses that majority of the majority that he wants, and then the Progressive Caucus on the left revolts against the deal, that could kill it. That said, as of right now, Kevin McCarthy is shoring up support from the center. You saw that the New Democrats came out in favor of the deal yesterday. That's 100 votes right there for it. And you're seeing a lot of statements from centrists and establishment Republicans in favor of the deal. So it does look right now that Kevin McCarthy does have momentum in getting the votes he needs. Remember, he doesn't need every Republican. He just needs a majority of them, and then they need a majority of the Democrats to stand with it as well. And the Democrats are doing a fair amount of whipping as well, certainly the White House is, and it does seem like they're getting more and more support among Democrats for this compromise.
So, Peter Baker, let's talk about the White House's approach here and from President Biden, one who has made no secret that he believes the key to politics is working across the aisle, try to find a bipartisan agreement. Frankly, this has been a number of times he's been willing to anger some of the forces on the left, believing that at the end of the day they'll be with him, or at least they've got no alternative to go elsewhere. So give us the latest from the West Wing as to how they view how this deal came together and what the reaction will be.
Yeah, of course, what President Biden wants to do is present himself as the one person who can still make bipartisanship work in a partisan era. And, of course, he has a record to talk about already in terms of the infrastructure bill and the semiconductor industry bill, the toxic burn pit bill. And now he's going to be able to take this to the country and say, see, we can still make government work. I can work across the aisle even if I don't get everything I want and they don't get everything they want. That's not an argument that rings, satisfying to a lot of the Democrats, as Leanna and Luke were just talking about. The House Democrats have a different imperative. Their imperative is to win back the House, and in some ways, to them, sharpening the differences rather than coming together is the way to do that. So they have kind of a different starting point when they look at these negotiations. But the President of the United States, of course, is responsible for the country not going into default as best he can do it, and he was willing to make some concessions in order to get that, even though he said he wasn't going to negotiate over the debt ceiling. That's exactly what it did, of course. He didn't get any new Democratic priorities in there, but he did a lot to shave down what the Republicans have started with. He protected essentially the gains of the last 2 years when Democrats were in charge in terms of his climate priorities, in terms of his student loan forgiveness, in terms of the larger spending increases that had happened over those 2 years. Basically, those are now baked into the firmament in a way that he feels puts them beyond challenge, assuming they can get it through the House and the Senate.
So, Luke, the White House was betting early in the process that Speaker McCarthy, who, of course, took him 15 votes even to become Speaker, that he wouldn't be able to control his caucus conference to this point, that he would lose control, and that would give them the advantage in negotiations. So far, he's held them together. So just talk to us about where Kevin McCarthy stands right now in terms of whether he has consolidated his grip on power in the House, or do we think that these Freedom Caucus members could still active sabotage here and blow up not just the deal, but potentially his speakership?
Well, Speaker McCarthy has begun referring to himself as sort of the underestimated man in Washington. And almost every press conference he reminds us that he's all constantly underestimated, and that he did overcome the 15 votes to become speaker, and that he did unify the conference to pass certain bills through the House that many thought could not be passed. So he has done the job of rallying many Republicans to his side, but this is his biggest test to date.
Okay, so that was MSNBC, and now Fox News.
Joining us now, Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, I don't know how much rest you've gotten, but let's dive in because you got a deal and now you got to sell it to members. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those who are upset. Congressman Dan Bishop, Chad talked about him. He tweeted this after the call you had with the group last night. Heard the call. Rhinos congratulating McCarthy for getting almost Zippo in exchange for $4 trillion debt ceiling hike was enough to make you. And he used the vomit emoji. Actually, it's so bad they won't give a figure for the debt ceiling hike, only that it's suspended till first quarter of 2025. Our bill was a year less. Your reaction? He's probably a no vote.
Well, that's okay, because more than 95% of all those in the conference were very excited. But think about this. We finally were able to cut spending. We're the first Congress to vote for cutting spending year over year. So you cut that back. You fully fund the veterans. You fully fund defense. But you take that non-defense spending all the way back lower than 22 levels. Now you get work requirements for TANF and SNAP, where the Democrats said that was a red line. Now you're able to reform NEPA. How frustrating we are. It's been 40 years since you could streamline it. To build a road in America takes you 7 years of review. We now limit that where it's focused, where you can only review it for 1 to 2 years. We're going to get America working again. We get the process working again, where we always have these omnibuses at the end of the year. We now penalize Congress if they don't get their jobs done. There is so much in this that's positive, and measure it to all the other debt ceilings. When Republicans had the presidency, the Senate, and the House, did they ever cut spending? No, they increased it. We were able to do this when the president said he wasn't even going to talk to us. This is really a step in the right direction. It puts us a trajectory that's different. We put a statutory cap on only spending 1% for the next 6 years. So we let government grow, but at a slower rate.
So let's go to that point. There's a lot there, but on that issue of spending, the White House is sending around its side. And of course, they're going to take credit too and want a victory lap. They say this: there are no budget caps after 2025, only non-enforceable appropriations targets. We all know how non-enforceable targets work in Washington. So they say you might have gotten something for a year or two, but after that, there's nothing to it.
No, first of all, watch what the government has done before. They increased it.
Okay, but are they not telling us the truth there?
No, you have a statutory cap on there. We've got to be able to stay in the majority. Then we could have a rule to be able to keep it going forward. The other thing you have here, too, is for the very first time, you have administrative pay-go. We had a president that spent another $1.5 trillion around Congress. That can no longer happen.
Meaning if he takes executive actions.
I'm sorry, what?
Meaning if he takes executive actions, he's got to
cut to be able to go forward.
Talk about where he's going to pay for it.
He doesn't have to talk about it. He has to do it. That would have saved us $1.5 trillion in the first 2 years of this presidency. That's a major savings. That has never been in law before, and now it's being put into law. If you look at each movement here, this is a whole new direction. Just think about how this even came to fruition. Normally, you have a 1,000-page bill. This is going to be less than 150 pages. Normally, the country doesn't know about it till after it's passed. No, we'll wait 72 hours. This is worthy of the American people. I want them to read it. I want them to understand it. We only have the majority in one house with a 5-seat majority, with a president who said we would never talk about this, who had Chuck Schumer said this would be a clean debt ceiling, we would just raise it. That's not the case. You've got work requirements to help people out of poverty into jobs. You've got reforms that we can build things, cut the red tape. We capped so the president can't just spend money wildly. We're actually spending less than we spent last year. That hasn't happened in Congress. So maybe it doesn't do everything for everyone, but this is a step in the right direction that no one thought we would be at today.
Let's talk about work requirements, because you all have said it was sort of a red line. Congressman Garrett Graves, one of your top negotiators on this, when he was asked Friday if you guys were going to back off on that, he said, quote, hell no. But the White House, again, that's an area where they're celebrating. They say there are no changes to Medicaid. You referenced SNAP and TANF. And so basically SNAP includes an expansion for veterans and people who are homeless. So there's an expansion there to some extent for some credits. But and the changes that you did get will lift the age and the requirements and those kinds of things, but that they sunset. So they don't last for very long.
You can't tie one Congress to the next. No, they don't. They sunset after 7 years when you go forward. But let's see what the White House doesn't write in there. There's a 12% exemption for every state, and the states are using this to exempt people. We lower that to 8%. We take the age from 49 to 54, so it encompasses more people. What did we exempt? Veterans. I think that's appropriate that veterans get exempted.
Of course.
But what we're talking about...
But those are dollars. When you talk about more benefits for more people.
And you know, at the end of the day, it saves more money, because what does a work requirement do? It's only on able-bodied people with no dependents. Instead of borrowing money from China to pay somebody to sit on the couch, we now give them the process to go get a job. Every study has shown when you do that, it puts more people to work. And when they work, what happens? More people are paying into Social Security and Medicare. You will see at the end of the day, this puts our economy stronger, less dependent on China. We cut money, so we stop the inflation the Democrats are doing. This is a tough position because the Democrats have spent so much, made it so easier for people to not go back to work, and we just changed the course, shrunk the ability for exemptions on the percentage, and now are going to provide people more jobs.
Okay, let's talk about the IRS, because there have been talk of trying to scale back some of the $80 billion. Congressman Dan Bishop also tweeting on this. He says one of the $80 billion Democrats appropriated, of the $80 billion appropriated to the IRS over 10 years, the deal rescinds only $1.9 billion. You read that right. That's the kind of get that's so good. McCarthy agreed to increase the debt ceiling $4 trillion.
Yeah, let's have the full explanation. Do you know how much they're going to spend this year for IRS agents? $1.9 billion. So we repealed every single dollar they were going to use for IRS agents. So they hired zero. So I have to come back next year. So I don't get all of it repealed, but they have none for this year. I don't understand if you stopped all the hiring of any IRS agents, that is not a win in his eyes. So I'm not quite sure.
Do you have negotiating room though next year?
I'm sorry.
Do you have negotiating room though next year if this deal is still in place? I mean, what kind of negotiations are the Democrats going to want to engage in?
Well, we have the majority. We can govern and engage in anything they want to engage in. But what we have found, since we've taken the majority, we changed this country. We opened the House back up. We not only have we repealed the IRS agents they're going to have today, we put in work requirements. We're now spending less money, the first Congress to do that in a Congress before. We've now capped the president that he can't just go spend $1.5 trillion. We've made fully fund our military and our veterans, but the non-defense level goes back to 22 levels, even below that. Think about that. We don't control the Senate. We don't control the presidency. So compare us to when we controlled all three. We didn't do any of that. We spent more money. It's a new day. It's a new Congress. And it's a new Republican majority.
So the Washington Post, writing about this yesterday, said this about what's ultimately in the deal. They said the White House agreed to an inflation-adjusted reduction in direct spending on discretionary programs, but one that will be mitigated by redirecting funds from other areas, such as the money clawed back from Internal Revenue Service expansion. Spending on these programs will rise by 1% in 2025 under the deal. There's a question about whether a lot of this is just a wash, if they're just moving money from one place to another.
Let's think about this. The president increases by $6 trillion. We have always said we're going to call back money, and then we're going to let government only grow at 1%. Why? Because it's been growing at 33% with the Democrats on discretionary spending. The president said we could only look at about 14% of the entire budget to get this done. We've been able to achieve that in this short time frame. But think about what else we repealed. This is the largest rescission in American history. You can add up all the rescissions from all the other Congress. This is greater. And what are we pulling back? CDC's Global Health Fund. So no longer are we sending $400 million of American taxpayers' money to China. We continue to pull that back. That is a victory for the American public, and I'll debate this bill with anybody, because at the end of the day, is it everything I wanted? No, but we don't control all of it. But it is the biggest rescission in history. It is the biggest cut in Congress has ever voted in that process, and you know what? We've been able to do it by making the economy even stronger, by putting work requirements in to put people back to work, and then streamline NEPA that hasn't been done in 40 years.
Okay, so that was Fox News. So you have MSNBC and Fox News, their versions of how the debt ceiling went You decide. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.